I think probably what's happened is there's been more note gained through some of the theatre work that I've done, which might not have happened through the film medium. But I wouldn't say it's more important. I mean, when I was a young actor, it certainly did seem to me that whereas films were a potent part of an actor's life and the life of that just as an ordinary person one was used to. I mean, one went to the cinema, one loved films. And if you're going to be an actor, then films had to be a part of it. It seemed that to learn your craft, you had to work on challenging and really good writing. And of course, the theatre was where you found the bulk of good writing. I think also there was probably a sense that simply in order to be a good actor, you had to have a theatre training. So, I mean, that's probably wrong. I mean, there were wonderful film actors who probably have never been in a theatre. But certainly that was how I felt. And a good theatre training, I feel, is important. It's been very important to me. It is where I found you test yourself against, or not against, but with really brilliant writers of genius, people who can truly understand the human condition and express it wonderfully well in language. So it has been important to me, the stage, but I wouldn't say more so than film.
I just wondered the way you reacted then when you're talking about language, and you mentioned that as the first most important thing to
Well,
agree. It's really, I agree with you, but that's why perhaps I thought maybe the film, with its different aspect, I mean, to them, often a screenwriter is the least important part of a film, in a sense.
Shouldn't be. Shouldn't be. It all starts with the story you're trying to communicate. I mean, God knows that's the most important thing, isn't it? You know, I mean, the man who can perceive the life in a certain way, then we come to it and try and bring it to life. I think it's true that these days, a good script, maybe it's different between England and, let's say, America. I know we're in Australia, but I don't have I mean, you've got some wonderful Australian directors and films, but if you make a distinction between England and America, I think the Americans call a good script a good story. The English call a good script a piece of good writing. I mean, it might actually not be a good story, but if it's got, you know, perceptive and detailed insight, well expressed verbally in its sense of language, and that's what we'd call a good script. And the Americans don't give a damn about, you know, really what exists within the scene, in a sense, as long as the story is good. I mean, the secret is to marry the two. But no, I mean, film is terribly important. I mean, it reaches so many people, and there are such wonderful films.
Radio was your first love, really, the first break that you had, wasn't it, after some initial stint on stage in your college years?
Correct, that's right, yes. 1930, I went into Chicago to audition for a program called Empire Builders for Great Northern Railroad, and I won that audition, and it went on the air in September of 1930. It was coast to coast, and in March of 1931, I took over a program called First Nighter, which went on. It stayed in the first 10 for the 7 years I was with it.
What sort of program was that?
First Nighter was a program of a 3-act play done in a half hour on radio, with a man called Mr. First Nighter introducing it, you know, and there was atmosphere, noise going into the theater and all that kind of thing. I would imagine that the 3 acts consumed no more than maybe 22, 23 minutes of time. But it was a very well done program. They worked very hard at it. As a little example, out of 200 scripts, they would choose 20, and June Meredith and myself would go into a room in the offices of the agency, and the people from Campana and the agency would listen in another room, you know, over the radio. We would read 20 scripts to them in an afternoon, and out of that they generally picked 4. So this is 4 out of 200. And for that little half-hour show, we rehearsed an average of 16 hours a week.
Yes.
So
that was in the days, of course, when radio was extremely big too, wasn't it? It's probably come back a little bit these days, but never as big as that, I don't think.
Oh no, no, no! It never ever got as big as that. And of course, that was the very beginning of the bigness of radio. Paul Whiteman, for instance, started that same year, and I don't know who all Amos and Andy had been on for about 2 or 3 years. But then after that came the Fibber McGee's and the Bob Hopes, you know, and the Bing Crosby shows and all that kind of thing. They were a little bit after that, but that was the beginning of it.
It was about 1936, I think, when you actually went to Fox. How did that come about?
I made a test in August of 1935 for Metro, and they didn't like it, and neither did I, but later I found out I never did like anything that I did, so that wasn't unusual. But an agent by the name of George Frank saw the test at Metro, and he thought there was something in it that maybe Fox might be interested in. So, because Fox was in trouble, Will Rogers had just been killed, and Shirley Temple was through, and Janet Gaynor was through, and Warner Baxter was through. They had no stars over there. So I made a test for them in New York in December of 1935, and I think it was the last week of January. They gave me a contract for 1 picture and options for 5 years of single contracts, single-year contracts, 40 weeks guaranteed out of them. And that's the way it all began.
But it didn't last that long. It didn't stay that way. I think in the first year in Hollywood you made 4 films, and I think it was something like that for the next 10 years.
No, not 10 years, but that first year, I did make 4 pictures that first year. But for 3 years after that, Alice Faye and Tyrone Power and myself all made 6 pictures each a year.
Yes.
Every year.
How could that possibly be? When you look at the standard of those films, they still stand up today. You know, they're still highly entertaining films.
This is a question that I asked Richard Zanuck, and I asked a number of people about it, people that are, you know, are an important part of the business. Where did the extra time, why is it necessary? Nobody can figure it out. We were shooting all those pictures in between 26 and 30 days. That's as much as we took. Today, Cocoon, as an example, took 10 weeks of shooting. Trading Places took 12 weeks of shooting. And nobody knows where the time went. When you're on a set, it seems like everyone works just as hard as they ever worked, but the time goes, and I don't know how.
Perhaps a lot of it is the fact that so many movies now are made outside, where you haven't got the control over the light, they haven't got the control over the conditions. Perhaps it has something to do with that.
It could have something to do with it. I can't remember. It does seem to me in retrospect, and my mind can betray me a little bit, but it does seem like it takes longer between finishing one setup and the shooting time for the next one. It does seem like it takes longer.
I think the second film that you made was, if I remember correctly, Ramona.
It was.
Which was, I think, the first Technicolor film that Fox ever made, the first full Technicolor film.
It was. As a matter of fact, I think it was the second full-length feature ever made in color.
This must have been a very exciting time. I mean, from radio all of a sudden, and you must have realized at that particular time that you were making something rather special here in Ramona.
Well, everyone seemed to think that, and naturally by that time I had no notion of what really the motion picture acting business was all about. So I fortunately had a man by the name of Henry King who directed that picture, and he was a good one. He wasn't a great one, but he was a good one in my book, although I can be mistaken about that because he later did Song of Bernadette and won an Academy Award for it, and so did the picture, so I don't know. But he was a patient man, and he was a man that he was a perfectionist in a way, and he would explain to me what he wanted and how to do it and all that kind of thing, and he was very gracious with his time, and it was fortunate for me that I had someone like that. Of course, Loretta knew the business backwards and forwards by that time, but it was a learning process for me in difficult circumstances because the shooting was very, very difficult. You know, the film was slow
Because
and they needed so much light.
New techniques being discovered
totally,
there, I should think.
Totally new. And you had two different sets of cameramen. You had a Technicolor cameraman and you had a studio cameraman. You know, they had to learn to work together and all that kind of thing. So there were problems, but it was well worth it.
You worked with so many people whose names are legendary these days, apart from your own. I mean, Sonia Heaney in movies, Alice Faye, and I believe I read somewhere that in the 70s, I think it was, you had teamed up again with Alice Faye to do Good News. Is that correct?
Yes, I did, but I only did it for 13 weeks.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah, John Payne and herself did the national tour, and then they opened on Broadway, and it was not a success on Broadway. And then for the summer, I think I did 13 weeks with her up in the northeast part of America.
Yes, one tends to think that once people's names disappear from the screen, say in a country like Australia, that they somehow stop working, but you've never done that, as a matter of fact.
No, I kept busy all the time. I switched from pictures to stage, and I did a lot of stage work. In fact, in the 12-year period prior to Trading Places, practically all I did was stage work.
Just again going back to that extraordinary screen career there at Fox, in '39 I think it was, you played both Alexander Graham Bell, which has haunted you to some degree ever since, I'm sure, and Stephen Foster.
Mm-hmm.
These films still have these great entertainment qualities. Did you have any idea when you were making those that this was something that was going to last, or did you not think like that? What was your feelings at those times?
No, I don't think there was anything unusual. Alexander Graham Bell was just another picture so far as I was concerned. It was a sort of a rush job for me because I didn't finish midnight until midnight of the night before I was to start Alexander Graham Bell, and there was a reason for that. We started on the 6th of January, and Loretta Young's contract was up on the 7th, so it had to start shooting on the 6th. And the only thing that was different about it was one of Bell's daughters was on the set every instant that film was shot. She wanted to be sure that everything was exactly the way it should be. Mrs. Grosvenor was her name, and her husband was the head of National Geographic. Working, it really didn't, well, it wasn't all that unusual to a thing. It just was a picture to be made. Yeah. Now, Stephen Foster, that was a little bit different because I had a great admiration for the songs. I liked his music very, very much. And he had such a tragic life. I enjoyed doing that picture. Andrea Leeds was a lovely, lovely lady. She played the lead opposite me in that. Yes. She died just recently.
Yes, all those, the fact of the music has been very, very much a part of your life, hasn't it? It's been pretty important to you, really. I don't know whether you ever sang on radio, but you obviously must have. You've always had a very good voice, and it came out when you went to, not only in the musical films, but when you went to Broadway in the 50s.
Yes. Yes, I sang on radio, and I made a lot of musicals and pictures, a lot of those, and I opened 4 musicals on Broadway, as a matter of fact.
That's right, of which the most famous would be Silk Stockings.
Oh, far and away, far and away. Goldilocks was a semi-success. We ran for 5 months. And Henry Sweet Henry also, I think we ran for 5 months with that also. But it was not a success, not a big success. And George Roy Hill directed that too.
Is that right?
Yeah, but it didn't happen, even with him.
Took a while for him to get around to the Sting and other movies.
That followed it.
Yes.
That followed it.
Yes. But your film, the film that one will always remember you for, at least if films last, and I'm sure they will, is Heaven Can Wait, don't you think? Where you had the combination of Ernst Lubitsch and Samuel Raffleson. And perhaps what we're saying here is that a lot of the films that you made for 20th Century Fox, with 1 or 2 exceptions, they lasted because the qualities of the scripts and the performances in them were good, but they were really fairly journeyman directors, I always used to think. I mean, the Irving Cummings, the Archie Mayos, they were good workmen, but Ernst Lubitsch was something else, wasn't he?
Yes, as you said, Irving and Archie were pedestrian directors, really, actually. Nice people, awfully nice people, but Lubitsch was special. See, I figured if I could name 5 great directors of that time, this is about as far as I could go, and Lubitsch certainly was one of them, if not the #1. Capra was another one, Leo McCarey was another one, George Stevens was another one, and then I'm in trouble already trying to come up with other names. But we did, you know, everyone thinks that the pictures at Fox were special in some way or another. I don't know, Zanuck had a touch with musicals. And
Yes.
the majority of things that he made over there were musicals, or light comedy, like Love is News with Tyrone and Loretta and myself. Tay Garnett directed that. Tay was a good director. He was
Yes.
above pedestrian.
Yes, Tay Garnett used to have bursts of brilliance, I think. I think The Postman Always Rings Twice was Tay
Yes,
Garnett, which
that
was
was
a superb
his.
film.
That was his. He was a confused man insofar as his personal life was concerned, but a delightful Irish man. And you know, when they have a sense of humor, they have a tremendous sense of humor. And Tay had that, even though his life was kind of mixed up. Wonderful man to be around. Lovely person.
You mentioned Tyrone Power there, and of course, his Tyrone Power's son has a small part in Cocoon. Tyrone Power, Henry Fonda were 2 people you worked with quite a lot at Fox.
Yes, I did.
Do you have any particular memories of those that you...
Well, I have memories. I was closer to Ty than to anyone in the motion picture industry, and I never was a very close friend of his. Fonda, I did a lot of pictures with Hank. I don't know, 4 or 5, I guess. Hank was a man who really lived to perform. The rest of his life was a sad, sad affair. I think he was married 7 times, you know, and one wife, the mother of the 2 children, committed suicide. You know, she was in a mental home, of course, at the time, but she did commit suicide. And Hank was just terribly, terribly mixed up, you know, about what to do with life. Because he concentrated entirely on working. This is really, really all that meant anything to him. He drank, and he couldn't drink at all. Goodness sake, 2 drinks, and he was almost falling down. And later on, he quit it entirely. He was never an alcoholic. I don't mean that at all. But he just trying to get away from all the problems that he had. Close friend of Jimmy Stewart's, and they're two totally opposite people.
Yes.
Jimmy was in control all the time of everything.